Hello, my name is Julie Berniger, and I'm part of the IEEE Future Directions team. This webinar is brought to you by the IEEE Digital Reality Initiative, and it is the first in a series. Throughout the event, please be sure to use the chat feature for any audio and/or visual issues, and the Q&A feature for questions pertaining to the presented content. To learn more about future webinars, visit bit.ly/IEEE-DR-webinars. In this session, our featured speakers, Roberto Sirocco, the IEEE Digital Reality Initiative co-chair and Future Directions committee member, as well as Derek DeKerkhove, the former director at the McLuhan Program in Culture and Technology at the University of Toronto, will be discussing personal digital twins and their role in epidemics control. They will also address relative privacy concerns. To learn more about the featured speakers, check out their bios at digitalreality.ieee.org/education. Now I will be handing the ball over to Roberto Sirocco. Roberto, please begin whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Julie, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody. You see here the reference to the previous webinar. We actually held it last week. It was on a more general term. In this webinar, we plan to dive in a little bit more. You also see reference to the white paper that has just been published on this topic. So what I would like to do is actually to set the scene and then to speak briefly about the concept of digital twins to familiarize those of you that might not be aware of this term. And then we expand the concept of digital twins into personal digital twin and apply these to the epidemics. So let's start. What is an epidemic? Well, basically an epidemic is something where a disease keeps growing, and usually it starts low and then it grows more and more till the point that it seems to explode. And it's basically the fact that one person is infected and it gets into contact with several other persons, and there's a probability that this bug in this person move into one of these persons, and they will become infected as well. So the overall number of people infected in the second generation will depend on the number of people infected in the previous generation, the probability, and the number of people exposed to these bacteria or viruses. Now, epidemiologists usually use the R null to express the fastness, the rapidity of the virus contagion and exposure. And this R null is a function of the contacts that occur among a certain population, the probability that the contact may result in actually the infection, and the duration of the infection, so the time that the person remains contagious. Now, if you've got an R0 that is, or R now as I call it, that is greater than 1, then you get an epidemic. If R now is exactly equal 1, you get an endemic disease that is still in the region, but it occurs now and then it seems to fade away and then start up again. If you got an R null less than 1, then you have episodic occurrence of the disease, and the disease will tend to fade away. Now, if we're looking at the way that the epidemic spreads, you see you get this kind of exponential curve. And what's important to see is that the first part of the exponential curve looks like there's nothing going on. So it's very easy to miss this pattern that is actually an exponential growth. And on the other hand, if we are careful and we can look at this part, well, it turns out that this is the part where we can do most of our activity and have a stronger impact on what is going to happen farther down, because it's most sensitive to delay. So we really should try in our work to work on this part of the curve rather than then scrambling to do something once we get there. Now, one strategy is, of course, to decrease the R null. And this is very important. A decrease of R null will mean to decrease the slope of this curve. And the impact is really great. Just think about this. If you've got an R null of 1.15, meaning that one person is infecting one 0.15 per person, of course it's a statistic, and you've got the 21 people that have already been infected, by 2 months, you'll get 100 million, over 100 million people infected. But if you manage to decrease this R.15 to R.05, then this 22,000 people will only result in 400,000 contagion after 2 months. Of course, 400,000 is a huge number, but it's very little if you're comparing with this one. So it's very important to try to decrease this R1. Now, this is a mathematical world, but if we're going into the real world, what we found is that we have to confront ourselves with 3 categories of a population, which is usually called the SRI. S is the susceptible people, the green one, people that have not been affected by the virus, but if they come into contact with contagious people, the red one, they have a chance of getting infected. And then you have another part of the population, what we usually call, what epidemiologists usually call removed, that are those people that have been infected and either they have recovered, acquiring immunity, or they died. Now, these people that have acquired immunity are no longer contagious and can no longer be infected. So they decrease the amount of the maximum number of the existing population. We should also pay attention to the fact that a yellow guy can turn into a green one, depending on the kind of viruses. As an example, for the Clostridium bacteria tetanum, we have a vaccine, but this vaccine only provides immunity for about 10 years, which means basically that after 10 years, this person is no longer immune and can become a susceptible person and infected. With COVID, we don't know exactly what the situation will be. Of course, everybody is hoping that we can provide a lifetime immunity, but the current situation is we actually don't know. But for sure, it will provide immunity for a certain amount of years, or that should be enough to stem out the epidemic. Now, when you're moving yourself into this kind of closed environment, a fixed amount of people, and divide them into susceptible, immune, and infected, what you get as evolution is this kind of curve. You see, is an S-type of curve, which is called the logistic curve. Actually, what happens is that the first part of the curve seems like an exponential curve. But what happens is that as the more and more people get infected, okay, more and more people get infected, the R goes down, and it reaches the point that it goes to 1, and then starts decreasing. So this is the inflection point. What every epidemiologist looks into this COVID-19 virus. Have we reached the inflection point? Because from that point on, it starts to decrease. This is the curve representing the total amount of people affected. This one is representing the same thing, but not in terms of the total amount, but the amount of people that get infected every day. And as you can see at the inflection point, you have the maximum number of people and that it starts to decrease. And this is quite understandable because you see, the more people are infected and the less people are available to be infected. So the total number will slowly decrease because the probability of contagion decreases. What's also important to see is the fact that this cure is not going to end up in affecting all people in a community, but only what is called a subset, because the herd immunity step in. Basically, is the fact that the probability of getting some people that is susceptible becomes very, very small as the number of people that have been infected has increased, to the point that it's very, very difficult to get further contagion. And you see that here the formula for immunity, the immunity is 1 minus 1 divided by R now. And in case of COVID-19, this is supposed to be between 47 to 80%. We are not sure because R is varying in different populations, so we don't know exactly. Let's say that with an R like a 3, value of 3 that we experienced in Milan recently, the herd immunity should be reached when you reach a level of about 70% of people either being vaccinated or having been affected by the virus and acquired immunity. So what are the strategies to try to block or manage at least this epidemic? Well, basically, the first one is, of course, vaccination. But if you don't have a vaccine, which is the current situation for COVID, then you can move to strict containment, meaning everybody stays at home and everybody blocks the number of contacts with anybody else. Of course, if you don't have contact, you remember in that formula of R null, you no longer have an epidemic going on. It's very strict. It was very difficult to reach this strict containment. Another approach is to chase the infectious and the exposed, the potentially exposed to the risk of infection, and lock them down. This is the strategy that was followed in Taiwan and in South Korea, and it worked pretty well. It's not completely eradicated, but is very, very close to being eradicated. Another strategy is to try to decrease the R null, even though we may not manage to bring it down below 1. But then result in a curve, you see that you have a peak when you're starting to operate, you understand there's something going on, you start to take action, and you decrease this peak. It doesn't go up, but it continues over time. And in the end, what happens is that basically all the people that would have been affected if you didn't do anything will be affected anyhow over a long period of time. Of course, you plan and you hope that other factors like climate change, summer is coming up, will decrease the virulence of the virus, that the vaccine would come, and so on. So you try to, but at least this strategy will decrease the stress on healthcare structure. The other thing that you can do is try to decrease the P, that is the probability that somebody infected is actually infecting somebody exposed to this person. And that you can do using improved sanitation. You ask people to wash their hands any time that they go back home, and anytime they enter into a shop or get out of a shop and so on, use a disinfectant, sterilizer, and social distancing, because social distancing is enlarging the radius of protection for a single person. Another thing is that there are points that are attracting many people. Think about pubs, think about schools. Now, if you start blocking this point and say, okay, no longer people are allowed to do this, you're decreasing the amount of contacts that people are having, and so you're decreasing the R null. Another thing is that it was noticed by the Chinese Academy of Science, you see it here, that during the SARS epidemic in 2003, they detected super spreaders, meaning people that actually were responsible for over 90% of the contagion that occurred during SARS. Now, if you are able to block these people, you are clearly stemming the infection and the spread of the epidemics. Now, in Italy, as an example, we have noticed that these super spreaders have been unwillingly the people working in hospitals, because those infected went to the hospital seeking for cure, but also many other people were seeking for cure, not being infected, being in the same place and having the personnel of the hospital becoming infected, they propagate the infection. So this is something absolutely important. Wherever you have the risk of super spreader, you either need to block the super spreader or to protect them from becoming infected. This is very, very important, of course. And finally, what we see is that another strategy is that of creating island, okay, to isolate the place. This is what was done in China, where the hotbed was in Wuhan, and then they isolated Wuhan. And then they enforce isolation between Wuhan and other islands in China that were starting to close down. Of course, you have to make sure that resources are available so that the people living in that island can still survive. And this can be done either by having autonomous resources in the island, or much more likely to provide these resources from outside. But in that case, what you need to do is to make sure that you have no contagion in these moving of merchandise from one island to another one. Now, another possibility would be to enforce a restriction, and then after the epidemic is slowed down, you reopen the thing. It may happen that the epidemic then will start up again, and then you close it again. At this point, you get all these sort of waves that you see one after the other, and each one is going to be lower than the other one. This might be a way of managing, balancing the effect of closing down activities with the fact of containing the epidemics. Now, let's turn briefly to the digital twin. And you see, a digital twin basically is a digital model. So when you're designing a car, you're starting by designing the car at the computer-aided design. You draw a digital model of the car, then you pass the digital model of the car to the robots on the assembly line, and they build the car. And you are also embedding in the car plenty of IoT, Internet of Things, that will be able, once you're selling the car and the car goes on the road, to report back to the manufacturing plant if something is wrong. That allows you to provide maintenance whenever is necessary. Also, the digital twin contains the digital thread, which is basically the history of whatever happened to that digital twin over time. And this proved to be very useful. In the example of Tesla, it happened that they detected through the digital shadow that a certain amount of cars, not many, but a certain amount of cars, were actually experiencing some strange vibration on the back axis, on the rear axis and axle. And what they did was to use the digital thread to find out why are these cars experiencing this kind of thing and other cars are not. Well, it turned out that this particular set of cars were built by an assembly line where two robots, you see there are robots on both sides working on the car, two of these robots were actually fastening bolts with different strengths. And these over time creating an overbalance in the two suspension, leading to this vibration. So what Tesla did was to inform all the workshop around the US that when this kind of car would report back for normal maintenance, they should make sure to check the fastening of these and balance the faster of these two bolts on the two sides. Now, doesn't this ring like something that it would be useful for an epidemic? Creating a thread, knowing what's going on, having a digital model of what the population is and how they feel, having a digital shadow monitoring what's going on, and a digital trend that can bring us back maybe to the attraction point or to the hotbeds of the epidemics. Well, this is exactly what we are trying to propose by using personal digital twins. A personal digital twin would be a copy of myself, okay, my body, my environment, my experience, expectation, and so on. And actually today we are already mirrored by a number of companies around the world, the big guys. Amazon knows everything about myself in terms of what I buy, Facebook about my friends, Google where I go, what I search, and my telco, I follow my phone, know plenty of information about me. Now, the problem about this is that all these digital twins are not controlled by myself, okay? Amazon has a sort of digital twin of myself, so does Google, but that's not good because I would like to be the one that can control. Now, about what can this digital twin do? Well, it's about capturing the environment, the overall situation, what's going to happen. As an example, my cell phone can capture the fact that through GPS and Wi-Fi where I am, okay? But it can also capture, and this is something that is being considered today by the apps coming up for tracing COVID, it can also track the devices that are near me using Bluetooth, okay? You see here, my cell phone is capturing that there's another person with a cell phone nearby me. And also this guy is capturing this cell phone, is also capturing the one behind the wall. Now, this is the problem with using Bluetooth, because of course, what you get is a sort of narrow or closeness identification, but doesn't tell you that there's a wall in between that, of course, no virus could grow across that wall. So it's not a very fine thing, but still it can help in determining the risk assessment and in decreasing the effective reproduction number. Now, another way could be to use bioparameters through apps, and these are coming. You see, there's a Corona voice detect developed now by the Carnegie Mellon, and somebody else is also using it. There's a company, Epidemics, using cough to interpret cough and see whether that could be a sign of the presence of a coronavirus or not. Now, all these bioparameters are important, particularly when you can use this data and compare this data across a variety of populations, so that you just don't learn from a single person, but from many persons in a community. And this leads to the fact that you can decrease the number of max and the N max by identifying people that might be involved in that thing and then isolate them. Bioparameters can also be acquired through other devices, through other wearables, like this one that you see here, that is providing oximeter measurement or temperature measurement. There's a rumor that the next Apple Watch will be able to provide the oximeter measurement and the temperature measurement as well. Now, another thing that is important is the fact that you can process all this data on board in your cell phone, and your cell phone, as is shown in the figure there, is tied to ourselves, is a personal thing. So I can really manage this kind of thing. I'm fine with having my data inside my cell phone because I know they are still there. And sometimes, as I mentioned, this internal local processing is not sufficient. And what you need to do, you need to go outside and look at what the other cell phones are doing, having in the cloud a processing, artificial intelligence, making sense of all this data. And this area can also benefit from data created not by cell phone or wearable, but data created by the network. Putting together all these streams of data, I can get a lot of information about the risk, okay? So I can decrease this effective R, I can decrease exposure, I can decrease Nmax. And this is particularly important for a virus like COVID, because in COVID, what we have is the latency period, which is the period from the moment I get infected to the period I become infectious, is shorter than the incubation period, which is the period from the moment I become infected and the moment I show signs. Now, there are a number of signs that are not perceived by myself, but can be perceived by artificial intelligence, looking at my basic healthcare parameters, particularly when this healthcare application can benefit from data analytics coming from millions of other cases. Then it can become very, very sensitive. And more important, in this scheme, the global sensitivity that we have at this level is actually put inside my local sensitivity because it has to be trimmed, finely tuned to my particular body, to my particular physical situation. So we are getting the best of both worlds by looking together and containing part in the local and part in the global part. Now, the conceptual architecture for making this working would be to have a healthcare institution that is receiving potential red flags from my PDT, and of course, here I am, the physical twin, my PDT detects something wrong, provides a red flag notice at the healthcare institution, not to someone else, okay? And this healthcare institution, based on data analytics derived from the analytics of many PDTs that are raising red flags, can say, hey, there's an epidemic that might be going on. And then it goes to the authority and say, hey, there's an epidemic, we should do something about it. Now, the authority does not need necessarily to know that I am the one that raised the red flag. Quite simply, can provide prescriptive analytics applying to all personal digital twin, saying whoever is experiencing this kind of situation has to warn their physical twin that physical twin needs to stay home. So the authority doesn't need to know about myself. It's just about the awareness created by my physical digital twin. Okay, so this is very, very important. Then you can have enforcement on a second level, meaning that if my physical digital twin, personal digital twin is saying to myself, look out, because you might be infected and you've got to stay home, and I'm not staying home, then it can go back to the healthcare and saying, hey, this guy is not staying home. And based on that, they go to authority and release my identity and say, hey, look, this one is not staying home. But this is the same kind of privacy violation that I get when I get a Maserati and I can go for 200 miles an hour, and then I try to go and there's a camera, speed trap taking me at overspeeding and informing the police. It's exactly the same situation. Now, the personal digital twin is something that can divide effectively the privacy of the person from the sharing at societal level. And these can be done based on personal context. Regulation can be seen as a value because it provides the general framework and on which all personal digital twin can conform and provide awareness. Now, the personal digital twin can become a sort of privacy manager because it's the gateway that can release data coming from myself to someone else, to some institution, but based on a framework that is common to everybody, okay? And it only needs to release this data in certain very specific situation. And most of the time is just very few data and may not even need to disclose my personal name, my identity. So it's a sort of gateway. It's a sort of gateway that is also receiving feedback because of data analytics performed in the global space and analytics performed at the local space, and can warn me, hey, you might have got the infection, and so you must behave in this specific way. Okay, so this is very important because it's providing me a service. It's not just a service to the community, to the world, but to myself. So we have these two environments. One is the local one, and the local one, as you can see here, can be extended to the family, okay, to a condominium. You decide, okay, in this area, we want to live together, we want to mingle together, we don't want to confine ourselves, myself from my children and so on, from my kids, but then I'm sharing with these people my data, so that we have a local awareness space that indeed can oversee all of these guys together, okay? And then we have the global awareness space, and these two are connected through the regulatory enforcement environment and through a value perception of what needs to be shared, what can be shared, and so on. Now, this is what is trying to be actioned today by using cell phones and by understanding our cell phone is connecting to all the other cell phones. And this is a map of Codogno, which is an area in Italy that was a hotbed of COVID-19 in the very beginning. And they try to work out in these how people are moving about. Are there super attractors there? Are there super spreaders there? And because of that, they try to limit this kind of thing. Now, this also has an impact on the economics in general. And the problem now is that I confine people, but then these people can no longer go to work. Then there's a strong pressure coming up and saying, let's release the containment so that people can move back and start working again. So production can increase again. Now, this is leading to different scenarios. One scenario is that I constrain everything, everybody stops working, and then the economy goes down, but then all of a sudden I open up everything so everybody starts working again, and we have a V-shaped recovery, okay? Everybody starts to go up again. Or I just watch out for what's going on. I just close one part of the country, then I close a little bit more, then a little bit more, then I open a little bit more, I open more, and so on. I get a U-shaped economy in terms of recovery. Or I can do something like, okay, I close down, then after a little while I open up, then the epidemic startups again, then I close down again, then I open up again, and so on. And this gives, of course, a W-shaped economy. And of course, nobody wants to have an L-shaped economy when I closing down, everybody's blocked, and then I go into stagnation and recession, and I cannot get out of that. So the personal digital twin can help in shaping the curve of the recovery by understanding what's going on and who is involved in doing what and what is the situation of that particular person, how can he contribute to the general economy and what he should not be doing, because otherwise the epidemics will start up again and so on. So they are very important also for regulating this kind of thing. Now, you might ask, what's different from an app? Okay, that everybody's talking about an app. Well, personal digital twins are much more sensitive because they are customized to the individual, while an app is general. They can be tuned by the authority at micro level, framework instantiation. So remember, the framework is very general, but the instantiation is on the personal level. And these two are decoupled. It can be perceived as a personal choice because it's my personal digital twin saying that, although it provides a connection to the societal rules. And besides, epidemic control is just a way to benefit from personal digital twin. It can become an accepted seamless extension of the self. Now, there's a lot of talking about privacy, and Derek is going to go deep into this kind of thing. I just want to mention Shoshana Zuboff. She was a very vocal. She was very vocal in the risk on losing privacy. She wrote a book, a quote or a book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, and she was very local against privacy violation. But in a recent interview last week, she said, forget privacy. The apps to control the virus should be controlled by public institutions and be mandatory, as vaccines are, not as in Italy are planning to do, to have just a voluntary use of the app. Now, remember that the application of technology depends on cultural, social factors, and political systems. Here you see the map the John Snow made for the cholera epidemics in London. He worked out what was the problem.
Well, hello to everyone at whatever time I meet you. And thank you also, Roberto, for the fantastic lecture you just gave us. And I think my title corresponds to it, The Personal Digital Twin to the Rescue. So this is, oops, happening here, why am I not, there we are. This is the overview of my argument. So I'll be going through these steps, but just to give you an idea where I'm going, first of all, COVID-19 is a global challenge, not merely at the health level for everybody, but at three different and complementary levels. The global dimension itself, you have to discuss a bit how COVID-19 has actually affected that. The economy versus the public health, very much discussed, and it clearly also presented in the previous presentation. And then the individual versus the community rights, which is something that we'll have to go into some detail. Then something that's important is the impact of the digital transformation. The tendency is to consider the digital transformation as something that affects business and organizational matter, but it actually is much deeper than that. And if one thing the lockdown has as effect, it has to accelerate the digital transformation. It also reveals that the effect of the digital transformation are much deeper than on the economy. And we find that the responses from East and West are quite radically different. The West response is the digital twin. And I would like to go in some detail on history, format, content, and risks. And how are we negotiating the Western individualism within the digital transformation? So there's the issue of contact tracing, which has been covered beautifully in the presentation. And then there's this new idea with a strange word, human rights, which is a beginning of thinking about how we protect ourselves, both as individual physically and as entities which have virtual extension. I may be running quickly through some of the requirements about contact tracing from the Chaos Computer Club, because I think they've gone into much detail about this. But the real issue of the whole argument is responsibility. It's a fundamental ethical issue, and it's just a matter of being good or bad. It's a matter of where does the motivation to be good or bad come from? So what's the global challenge? Well, I think we all agree that it's been a miserable failure. It's an amazing failure too. It just happened in a domino effect. Everybody took on their own, decisions without really considering a collaboration with other countries, particularly disturbing concerning the future of the European Union. Many aspects was balancing lockdown against contact tracing. Both of them can actually work against each other, and so we'd like to see what happens there. And then, of course, dishing support to big industries, making short-term help to individuals, and promoting individual rights at the national level. All nations considered as a single individual, saying, "Well, I've got my rights to do what I want to do." So it's not a great response. In fact, it's a disastrous one, and it doesn't augur so well for the future. But who knows? We might learn from this lesson. What's the impact of the digital transformation? The lockdown is serving it by changing the balance between physical and virtual life. We now spend much more time on our screens than we did before, if we weren't spending enough time already. And people are actually transferring their habits from a physical to a virtual kind of relationship, not only in the way they deal with communication with friends and family, but also in how they deal with possibilities and how they continue to work from home, which actually may not be such a bad thing, but that's one of the effects of the transformation. It also reveals that it affects much more than the economy. In fact, one way of looking at it is it changes the internal constitution of individuals. And I know that's not very well expressed, but what I'm trying to say is that basically the kind of sensibility that we have about ourselves and how we feel about ourselves is now taken over by algorithms, taken over by our cell phone. We send our memory to our cell phone. We send our judgment to our cell phone, expecting it, to be given to us by algorithm. The other thing which is very important is that the digital transformation has opposite effects in East and West. In the East, it encounters an entirely germane situation of a society that is used to be guided by a community spirit, as opposed to the Western culture, which for reasons that we won't go into, but which are absolutely becoming clear, has favored a very strong individualistic approach to daily life and reality in general. So that we can say that the digital transformation really favors community-oriented societies over the Western mode of life. There is a long history also to the personal digital twin. I don't know how many of you remember, have seen, would like to see this on the left here. You will see this image that actually you can click on when you get the I will spare you the video, it's 5 minutes, but you can click on it and you'll find so many predictive things from 1987 in this knowledge navigator that was circulated as a form of advertising for Apple. Now, 1987 is a long time back, and it was predicting not only the digital assistants such as Alexa today or Cortana, but also predicting the Google, the internet's enormous increase. And then eventually, from that story, arrived the personal digital twin, which, as I say, is the response of the West. So format, yes, the format can be all kinds of things, but depending on the format, there can be several levels of vulnerability. The evident one is the smartphone, and it is where we trust, and we heard Roberto Saraco talk about, the trust that we have for our own smartphone and the access that we have and the security of having the information back sent to us. But of course, we should also add that your smartphone is open city for anybody who you interest and without necessarily informing you. We can have also like this character here, a unified central character. The other question is, how many twins can we have? We can have twins as we could have as many personalities we wanted. On Second Life, maybe we'll have an industry giving us the possibility of adding twins to, as our alter egos, with or without the truth. Managing the privacy, which was something suggested by Roberto, is a very important thing. That's one of the aspects that the interactive features of a digital twin should definitely contain. The content is enormous. Digital twin in the human context is all the data footprint that we as humans create through our attributes, interaction, and online presence that combine to leverage innovation in IoT and analytics can help predict our future need, health, and otherwise. Oops, sorry. I invented this term, the digital unconscious, several years back to try and describe the impact of all the information that was given about us, everything that was known about you that you didn't know because you couldn't put it all together. And this has been lasting all the way until the time a digital assistant became invented. And somehow the digital assistants are doing a first level of gathering of all that information, but it's still unconscious in the sense that Alexa knows your data, you don't know what Alexa knows. What the difference between Alexa and any assistant and a digital twin is that actually suddenly all this unconscious material becomes conscious. It emerges from the unconscious into the conscious by belonging to something you can control. And so that's really interesting. A question by the person, by Rita Lashmi, a question that, you know, are known by Alexa and by your twins. How frequently do I travel? How often does that include a drink? My health devices, my phone, anything that we actually heard already from Roberto, so we can probably skip it. But the thing is, the idea is that you can aggregate all these fragments into a unified database. Personal digital twin as privacy manager. I found that very important, that expression, and actually I corrected my presentation just to add it in because it is indeed the issue that I'm bringing up here. We have all kinds of things that we can manage, such as event-specific systems, technology-mediated reminiscence, technology-mediated reflection, extraction system, and of course, life logging. Life logging is certainly going to accompany our digital twin. That is, everything we do, as long as we have chosen to let it happen in our twin, will be recorded and will be giving us information that is tracing back something that our personal failing memories simply don't have available. So this information is about and for the person by capturing records, facilitating retrieval. Personal informatics are powerful tools to help reminiscence, reflection, and behavior change. So this is a way by which we negotiate Western individualism, but it's not an issue in the East. Now, the app that was deployed in Wuhan let people know if a person at high risk of being infected was getting close. In this case, the smartphone is in the vicinity, started to ring. This is something that is being discussed right now. It's the contact tracing and the contact warning, and several countries are looking into it. I think that the example that was given by Roberto of being stopped or being caught by racing 200 miles an hour with your Ferrari is a legitimate way of, you know, entering your privacy. But as I showed before, there are a lot of areas which are vulnerable, and we want to make sure that we protect them. So negotiating Western individualism is presented here by a strange, it hasn't got a lot of following. I'm giving it as an example because it's a very interesting example of people being concerned about precisely the thing that's missing in our legislation. As a modern individual, you are composed of two intimately connected but materially distinct parts: your traditional physical bodily presence and your extended presence, which is what we've been discussing as the digital twin. The human state is a landless protest state that provides your digital extended presence with citizenship, security, and essential service in a permanent home. As a modern technological individual, your digital presence has become an integral part of who you are and what you do. And that is exactly where the digital twin is leading us. Well-being is vital for and inseparable from your well-being in the classical sense: your physical and financial security, your social and professional standings, your privacy and freedom, and your legacy. All the things that are part of the standard or the understanding of what it is to be a member of or citizen of Western countries. As such, this digital presence, or what we can more generally call your modern extended presence, has developed needs that parallel your traditional ones. It too requires rights, protections, and services. The human rights, the right to write, the right to perpetual security and growth, the right to autonomy, the right to migration, the right to privacy, the right to a constitution. And then there are all these extremely detailed requirements by this group called the Chaos Computer Club, and I'll go fast on this because for the benefit of time. But first of all, it's whatever contact tracing occurs should happen because of a real effective purpose. It should be free and voluntary and freedom from discrimination. So if you haven't accepted to do it, you shouldn't be punished for it. People who refuse to to use it must not experience any negative consequences. Fundamental privacy, only convincing concept based on the principle of privacy can with social acceptance be achieved at all. Of course, transparency and verifiability, no central entity to trust. Data economy, only minimal data and metadata necessary for the application purpose may be stored. Data that is no longer needed must be deleted. Anonymity must be guaranteed. Idea for contact tracing via wireless technology, Bluetooth or ultrasound must not be traceable. No creation of central movement or contact profiles. Methods such as central GPS location logging or linking the data to telephone numbers, social media accounts, and the like must therefore be rejected as a matter of principle. I read that one because that's one which is actually being considered and eventually applied even in Western countries. Unlinkability and observability of communication. So we're getting to the last bit here, and it's, what is that? I have just, no, sorry. So the responsibility social credits in China eliminate autodetermination, self-determination. By being observed all the time, social credits give you also valuation and judgment and execution of verdict, all of it automated. In the West, we have hypocritical practices. I say hypocritical because the West pretends to sustain it, and yet we all know about the amount of information that is being used for or against us. But a digital transformation is not interested in supporting either psychological or physical autonomy. There is an erosion of inner direction in the Christian tradition, which gave us guilt, the idea that we would be responsible from within for any action that we had done, good or bad. And yet, the appearance of the digital transformation is pushing us back to a shame culture. Externalization of responsibility. It's an effect of the digital transformation. This is where the digital transformation and the Chinese surveillance system meet. By itself, the digital transformation is not concerned with privacy of any kind. Trust is established by the knowledge that everybody is on the same page. So here's a takeaway. The digital twin, by any other name, is here to stay. We can see it's coming. It may not be called that way, but we're certainly going to have something of that nature because it will bring tons of industries. It's already present in digital assistants and in our smartphone as devices to negotiate our relationship to the digital and physical environment. This is the question, the internal self that's given by our culture, and that is the source of our motivation, may not disappear entirely, but it will not be private anymore, and may be subservient to our external one because our digital assistant will know a lot more, remember a lot more, have access to many more ways of dealing with information and data analytics and other things than we are ourselves. So that's something we would like not to leave to government and corporation. Thank you for, I hope you heard it all. I did not have enough feedback to be able to find out.
Thank you so much, Derek and Roberto. So I would like to thank our speakers, Roberto and Derek, as well as all of those who were able to attend the webinar. I would also like to thank the supporting staff members. In addition, please visit bit.ly/IEEE-DR-webinars to learn more about upcoming events. Once you close out a WebEx, you will be prompted to complete a survey. Please use this to share your feedback if you wish to get more involved with the IEEE Digital Reality Initiative, or if you have any additional questions. So I am going to stop now. We did have a couple of questions come in for Roberto. So one of the questions, why are almost all East Asian countries handling the pandemic way better than the West?
Okay, thank you, Julie. And let me first of all say that I'm not an expert in epidemics, so I might not be the right person to answer this. I can try and share my opinion. Well, first of all, you got to divide among the Far East Asian country in different latitude areas. If you're looking at Indonesia, Thailand, Laos, all the Vietnam, all the countries that are staying, let's say, in the tropical area and equatorial area, they are living in a very warm or hot climate. And there's a feeling, and we're seeing this also happening in Africa, that the virus is less contagious than in other parts. There was a study coming out from a university in Japan, in China, noticing that just 1 degree of difference in the average climate was creating a very significant different degree of contagious. So it affected the RNL that I was mentioning before. So that might be one thing. The second, probably even more important thing, is the fact that these countries have been hit by the SARS epidemic, and they learn from that experience. SARS epidemic was very far from the Western world. We didn't pay too much attention, and we didn't took advantage of the experience to get prepared for the next one. So this is another big difference, okay? Why was the SARS so contained and so easily contained with respect to the COVID? Well, COVID is a very nasty beast because, as I mentioned, the latency time is shorter than the incubation time, which means that there are plenty of people that not yet know that they are hit by the virus. They move around and they start infecting other people. Furthermore, it looks like up to 80% of the people that are involved, that have been infected, are not experiencing any significant symptoms. So these are really epidemic bombs moving around, okay? And this is what makes COVID more difficult to manage than SARS. But for sure, in setting in place that experience that was part of the SARS has helped a lot. If you're looking at Taiwan, Taiwan was in principle one of the first countries hit by the virus, but they were able to intercept it when it was in the very, very first stage of the curve, as I mentioned. And by enforcing tracing and isolation to both the infected person and to all his potential contacts, they managed to really stimulate the epidemics, and they did a wonderful job. In South Korea, they basically did the same thing. So I think these are the main reasons why those countries are having a lesser impact than we are in the Western world.
But I would have one more, if possible.
Absolutely.
I think that there's another thing, that culturally, the Eastern countries are community-oriented, and they don't have, everybody's capable of having, obviously, an individual sensibility and temperament. There's no doubt that that's a human thing to generalize, but it's very much reinforced in the West, and it's played down in the East. And so that there is much more tolerance in all these countries for things like the Wuhan application that I borrowed from you, by the way. So we are the ones who need protection. Our culture is the one that needs protection to stay the way we are. I believe that the digital transformation is affecting us in a much more difficult, rough way than it is affecting the Far East countries. So I think one should consider that too. It's a matter of, I mean, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, in China, having a secret was considered to be bad manners. You know, it's amazing. But we start with the secret. We start with Prometheus, the god who said, I know something that Zeus doesn't know, and that will be his downfall and my success. Our whole culture is based on having secrets and having privacy. Privacy is not that important, wasn't that important in Eastern countries.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. We also did have another quick question come in, and then unfortunately we are out of time. But we had someone ask, what are the next steps toward commercialization of personal digital twins and to put them to work?
Okay, I may take this one. Personal digital twins are already a sort of prototyping reality in companies like General Electric, like Philips. They are really working on this kind of thing in the healthcare, in the specific healthcare sector. And I have seen a tremendous amount of interest in companies providing telemedicine, remote medicine, consultancy, and so on. And basically what they do, they are building your digital twin, your personal digital twin healthcare part in order to be able to serve you wherever you are and whenever you want to be served. There has been an uptake in KRY in the last 2 weeks by 200% of registration for their services. Teledoc has seen a comparable increase uptake of their services. I think that all of these companies that are operating medical services from remote location, they are forced to use a sort of personal digital twin in order to perform this kind of thing. And they will emphasize the need for having remotized and wearable sensors to make it possible to have remote sensing of what's going on your body and in your body. So all these things are converging, and I think that the current epidemics is just a factor that will further push into this direction. So it's happening, as Derek said, it's really going to happen. It's a matter of how we are going to make it happen and what kind of measure and precaution will be taken, but it's going to happen.
There'll be wonderful apps being developed very quickly, and a huge amount of money made on digital twins in all their variations.
Okay, thank you so much, Roberto and Derek. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so at this point, any other questions will have to be taken offline. Recording of the webinar will be made available for a fee. IEEE members receive a discount, and IEEE Digital Reality Technical Community members can access the recording free of charge. Visit bit.ly/join-IEEE-DR to become a member of our technical community. And thank you again for joining. This concludes the webinar.